The sound of that slap cut through the entire lobby like a blade. One open hand, one deliberate movement, and the life of one woman, a black woman, standing in her uniform, doing nothing more than her job, was interrupted by the coldest, most calculated act of arrogance this hotel had ever witnessed. Charlotte Voss, heiress to a $4 billion empire. Copper hair, Valentino dress, champagne Birkin on her arm. She walked into that lobby like she owned every inch of it. And when Serena Hayes, beautiful, composed, unbothered, refused to shrink, Charlotte raised her hand and brought it across Serena's face. Hard, in front of everyone. The lobby froze. Guests stopped breathing. Ashikara hung in the air. And Serena, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She turned her face back slowly, looked Charlotte dead in the eyes, and said 7 words that nobody in that room would ever forget. What Charlotte didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined in her most paranoid nightmare, was that the woman she had just struck was wearing a gold dragon bracelet on her wrist that matched the ring of the most dangerous and powerful man in Manhattan, a Korean Mafia boss, who had just walked through those revolving doors, and he had seen everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There are moments in life that arrive without fanfare. No thunder, no warning light above the door. Just an ordinary Tuesday morning in Manhattan. The kind where the city moves the way it always moves. Indifferent, relentless, and entirely unaware that somewhere inside its polished machinery, something is about to break in a way that cannot be unbroken. The Voss Grand Hotel had stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 57th Street for 41 years. It had been built by Edward Voss in the early 1980s, with money that came from 3 generations of real estate decisions and one very fortunate marriage. And in the decades since its opening, it had become something more than a hotel. It had become a symbol. The kind of symbol that certain families in certain cities require to remind the world, and themselves, of exactly where they stand. The marble in the lobby had been imported from a quarry in northern Italy. The chandeliers had been commissioned from a glassmaker in Vienna, whose family had crafted lighting for European palaces since the 18th century. The flowers were replaced every morning at 6:45 before the first guest descended from their rooms, so that the lobby would always appear to exist in a permanent state of effortless perfection. It was, in every sense of the word, a stage. And like all stages, it required people who moved within it as if they owned it, and people who moved within it as if they did not. Serena Hayes had understood this dynamic from her very first day. She had taken the position 3 months earlier in early winter, when Kwon Ji-ho had flown to Seoul to resolve a matter that required his physical presence and his particular brand of quiet persuasion. She had chosen the job herself, not because she needed the income, not because she lacked options, but because there was something in Serena that had always refused to wait. She had grown up watching her mother work, watching her grandmother work, watching the women in her family fill the hours between one thing and the next with purpose rather than idleness. And so, while Kwon navigated the corridors of power on the other side of the world, Serena had laced up her black shoes, pinned her hair beneath the white staff cap, and walked through the service entrance of the most expensive hotel in Midtown Manhattan, as though the decision were the most natural thing in the world. What no one in that building knew, not the general manager, not the head of housekeeping, not the concierge who greeted guests by name and never once looked directly at Serena, was that the woman pushing the cleaning cart down the east corridor of the Voss Grand Hotel held a law degree from Columbia University, spoke 4 languages with full fluency, and wore on her left wrist just beneath the cuff of her uniform sleeve, a bracelet of solid gold carved in the shape of a dragon. A bracelet that had been placed on her wrist by hands tattooed like armor. On a night in December when Kwon Ji-ho had knelt in front of her in their apartment and asked her, in Korean and then in English because he wanted her to hear it both ways, if she would spend her life beside him. She had said yes in both languages. She had been wearing the bracelet every day since. But that Tuesday morning, as Serena crouched near the marble fountain at the center of the lobby to collect the pieces of a small ceramic vase that had slipped from the edge of a display table, the bracelet was hidden. The sleeve was down, the cap was on, and to every eye in that lobby, to the concierge, to the 3 guests waiting near the elevator bank, to the security officer stationed by the revolving door, she was simply a woman in a uniform doing what women in uniforms do. Little did any of them know that the next 4 minutes would become the most consequential 4 minutes in the history of the Voss family name. The revolving doors turned. Charlotte Voss entered the lobby the way she always entered rooms, as though the room had been built for the specific purpose of receiving her. She was 27 years old and had never, not once in her life, waited for anything she wanted. Her father had seen to that with the particular devotion of a man who confused indulgence with love, and had spent 2 decades mistaking his daughter's entitlement for confidence. Charlotte wore a white Valentino midi dress with gold hardware at the waist. Her copper-red hair fell in long waves past her shoulders. Her Chanel sunglasses sat pushed back on her head, and her champagne Birkin bag hung from her left arm with the easy carelessness of someone for whom the bag was not a luxury, but a utility. She was, by any conventional measure, beautiful. She was, by any honest measure, dangerous in the specific way that people become dangerous when they have never once been told no by someone they respected. Behind her, a young male assistant struggled with 2 pieces of luggage. She did not look back at him. Her eyes moved across the lobby with the practiced sweep of an owner inspecting inventory. The flowers, adequate. The lighting, acceptable. The concierge, already moving toward her with the particular posture of a man who had learned, through painful experience, that hesitation cost him. And then her eyes found the water on the marble floor. They found Serena. Charlotte stopped walking. She stood still for a moment, the Birkin bag motionless on her arm, the assistant nearly colliding with her from behind. And she looked at Serena the way people look at things they find offensive in spaces they believe belong to them. It was not a long look. It did not need to be. It was the kind of look that contains an entire worldview in the span of 3 seconds. The kind that arrives preloaded with conclusions that were formed long before this particular morning, long before this particular lobby, long before this particular woman crouching on the floor with a broken vase in her hands. "What a disgrace," Charlotte said. Her voice carried. She had never learned to lower it because lowering it had never been necessary. "They'll let anyone work here now, won't they?" It was not a question. Serena rose slowly. She set the broken pieces on the cart beside her. She turned to face Charlotte with an expression that was, and this was the part that Charlotte would never fully understand, entirely calm. Not the calm of submission, not the calm of someone swallowing anger to protect a paycheck, but the calm of someone who had already run the mathematics of the situation and found that she could afford, in every sense of the word, to simply be still. "It's already being cleaned, ma'am," Serena said. "It won't take long." Something moved behind Charlotte's eyes. Something that was not quite anger yet, but was looking for a reason to become it. The word, ma'am, had landed wrong. Too flat, too level, without the softening that Charlotte expected from people in uniforms. Without the invisible bow that she had come to require from service workers, the way other people require please and thank you. Ma'am? Charlotte let the words sit in the air. She glanced to her left, where 2 hotel guests had paused near the reception desk, watching. The audience, whether she admitted it or not, mattered. Are you actually looking at me right now? Do you have any idea who you're speaking to? I do, Serena said simply. And then she turned back to the cart. That was the moment. That small, quiet pivot. The return to work. The refusal to continue the performance. That was the thing Charlotte Voss could not metabolize. Not because she had been insulted, but because she had been dismissed. And Charlotte had never, not once, been dismissed by someone she considered below her. She closed the distance in 3 steps. Her hand was already moving before the decision had fully formed. The sound of the slap hit the lobby like a stone dropped into silence. Serena's head turned sharply to the right with the force of it. Her left cheek received the full open palm of Charlotte's hand. Not a glancing blow, not a reflex, but an intention. The sound was flat and absolute, and it seemed to stop the air in the room. A woman near the elevator pressed her hand to her mouth. The concierge froze mid-step, his hand still outstretched toward Charlotte in greeting. The assistant with the luggage went completely still. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then Serena turned her face back. Slowly. Completely. The mark of Charlotte's fingers had already begun to bloom across her cheekbone, a livid heat rising against her dark skin. But her eyes, those dark, quiet, absolute eyes, were not filled with pain. They were filled with something that looked, from a distance, almost like patience. You just made the worst mistake of your life, Serena said. Low, even, almost gentle. Charlotte opened her mouth. She had a response ready. She always had a response ready. But before she could deliver it, the revolving doors behind her turned again, and the particular quality of silence that entered the lobby with the man who came through them was different from any silence the room had held before. It was the silence of someone who already knew. Kwon Ji-ho did not rush. This was the first thing anyone who had ever truly encountered him learned to notice. Not the tattoos, not the tailoring, not the particular weight of his presence in a room, but the absence of urgency in his movement. He walked through the world at a pace that suggested he had already seen every possible version of what was about to happen, and had selected, with great care, exactly how he intended to respond to it. It was the walk of a man who understood that speed was for people who were afraid of what might occur if they slowed down. Kwon Ji-ho was not afraid of anything that could occur in this lobby, or in any lobby, or in any room that human beings had yet constructed. He was 34 years old. He had built his empire, the visible one and the invisible one, from a single meeting in a basement in Koreatown 16 years earlier, when he was 18 and already understood that the most dangerous men in any room were never the loudest ones. His tuxedo had been custom made by a tailor on Savile Row, who had been making suits for the same 3 families for 60 years. His Patek Philippe watch, black gold against his wrist, caught the chandelier light as he moved. The dragon scale tattoos that rose from beneath his collar and climbed the left side of his neck to the edge of his jaw were the only thing about him that announced itself without permission. And even they did so quietly. Black ink on warm skin, detailed with a precision that suggested they had been applied by someone who understood that a tattoo on a man like Kwon Ji-ho was not decoration. It was a record. 3 men had entered with him. You would not have known it unless you were looking, and almost no one in the lobby was looking, because Kwon had long ago mastered the art of making his security feel like furniture. They dispersed without instruction, one toward the east corridor, one near the reception desk, one positioned with his back to the wall beside the elevator bank. Each of them had already scanned every exit, every face, every possible variable in the room before Quan had taken his fourth step through the revolving door. He saw Serena immediately. He always saw her immediately. In any room, in any crowd, in any configuration of bodies and architecture, his eyes found her with a consistency that he had never bothered to analyze, because it had always felt less like a choice and more like a fact of his physiology. The way the body orients toward warmth without being instructed to. And what he saw made him stop. Not dramatically, not with an outward display of the thing that moved through his chest in that moment, like a current through still water. He simply stopped walking, and his eyes moved from Serena's face, the careful stillness of it, the turned cheek, the heat already visible against her skin, to the woman standing before her with a hand still partially raised. He had been told, once, by the man who had taught him everything he knew about patience, that the most important skill a man in his position could cultivate was the ability to feel everything and display nothing. That the moment your face became readable was the moment you gave someone a map to your weaknesses. Quan had taken that lesson and refined it over 16 years, until his resting expression had become something that people described, in whispered conversations they believed he could not hear, as a wall. The wall was in place now, but behind it, something very old and very certain had been activated. The general manager, Heiress, 53 years old and possessed of the particular brand of professional anxiety that comes from spending 2 decades serving the extremely wealthy, came rushing from the corridor behind the front desk with the expression of a man who had been warned that Charlotte Voss was arriving and had not been warned nearly enough. He emerged into the lobby slightly breathless, straightening his jacket as he moved, his eyes going first to Charlotte, the heiress, the priority, the name on the building, and then stopping completely when they found Quan Ji-ho standing in the center of the room. Heiress & Cole had worked in hospitality for 30 years. He had managed properties in London, in Dubai, in Singapore. He had served heads of state, celebrities, and at least 2 individuals whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. He had developed, through long experience, an instinct for the specific texture of power that exists in a person who does not need to announce itself. He had never felt that instinct fire with the particular intensity it fired now. "Mr. Quan," he said, and his voice had lost its professional steadiness somewhere between the corridor and the lobby floor. I wasn't aware you'd be coming in personally today." Charlotte turned toward the voice. She looked at Heiress & Cole with the expression she reserved for interruptions, sharp, impatient, already constructing the corrections she intended to deliver. Then her eyes moved past him to the man standing in the center of her lobby. "Who?" she said, in the tone of someone reading something distasteful from a menu. "Is that?" Harrison opened his mouth. No sound came out. Quan walked forward. He moved through the lobby with the same unhurried precision with which he had entered it. And the people in his path, the concierge, a bellman crossing with a luggage cart, 2 guests who had been standing near the fountain watching the preceding scene with the guilty fascination of witnesses who know they should look away, but cannot, moved without being asked, the way objects in water move when something large passes through them. He stopped in front of Serena. He was close enough that she could have leaned her head against his shoulder without effort, and the familiarity of his proximity, the specific way he positioned himself in relation to her body, the degree of closeness that exists only between people who have spent years memorizing each other's presence, was information that the room received before anyone in it could fully articulate what it meant. He raised his right hand. His thumb moved to her cheekbone with a gentleness that was, in the context of everything else he was, almost incomprehensible. He pressed lightly against the heat of the mark there. A question, the most private kind. Serena's eyes answered him. I am not broken, but you already know what happened, and you already know what comes next. He lowered his hand. He turned to face Charlotte Voss. The full weight of his attention arrived on her like weather. It was you, he said. Charlotte Voss had grown up in rooms full of powerful men. Her father was a powerful man. His colleagues were powerful men. She had attended dinners and galas and board meetings since she was 16 years old, and she had learned, in the particular school of wealthy American girlhood, how to hold her ground in the presence of power, how to perform unbothered, how to use her name like a shield, how to read a room and position herself within it at the correct angle. She had never been in a room where the angle did not exist. Excuse me? She said. Her chin lifted. I don't know who you think you are, but this is my hotel, and that woman was... It was you, Quan said again. Same register, lower temperature. Something in Charlotte's chest moved in a way she did not immediately recognize as fear. My father built this hotel, she said, and there was something new in her voice now. Not quite uncertainty, but the sound of a person reaching for a weapon and finding the holster lighter than expected. And if you have a problem with how I handle staff in my own property, you can take it up with our legal team, because I will not stand here and be... Your father, Quan said, and now the faintest alteration moved through his expression. Not a smile, not exactly, but the shadow of one. The kind that arrives when a person confirms something they already knew. Carries $40 million in structured debt with one of my investment funds. Quietly. Discreetly. As I prefer. The lobby was absolutely silent. Charlotte's mouth opened. This woman, Kwang continued, his eyes moving briefly to Serena, and in that brief movement was the entirety of something enormous, something that Charlotte's mind was only beginning to approach the edge of. Is my fiancé. The word landed in the room like a physical object. Charlotte looked at Serena. She looked at the uniform, the white button shirt with the gold crest, the black midi skirt, the white cap still pinned over the magnificent hair beneath it. She looked at the shoes. She looked at the hands. She looked, finally, at the wrist, at the place where Serena's sleeve had shifted slightly when she had raised her arm to steady herself against the cart. The bracelet. Gold. Heavy. A dragon carved in extraordinary detail, coiled around the width of her wrist. Charlotte looked at Kwan's right hand. The ring. Silver. The same dragon. The same maker. The same intention. That's... Charlotte began. The bracelet, Kwan said. That you did not notice when you struck her face, cost more than your apartment in Paris. Charlotte Voss stood in the lobby of the hotel that bore her family name, surrounded by marble imported from Italy and flowers that had been replaced that morning at 6:45, and felt, for the first time in 27 years, the specific vertigo of a person who has stepped onto ground they assumed was solid and discovered it was not ground at all. This, Kwan said quietly, and reached into the interior pocket of his jacket, is going to require a conversation. He extended the envelope toward Harrison Cole without looking at him. Harrison took it with both hands, the way one receives something one is afraid to drop. And in the silence that followed, Serena Hayes stood still beside her cart, her cheek still warm from the mark of Charlotte's hand, and watched the room rearrange itself around the truth that had always been true. That had been true every morning she had walked through the service entrance, Every afternoon she had pushed the cart down the east corridor. Every moment she had worn the uniform that this world had decided was the only thing about her worth seeing. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," she had said. She had not said it as a threat. She had said it because it was simply and entirely true. Harrison Cole opened the envelope with the careful movements of a man diffusing something. The lobby had not returned to its normal rhythm. The concierge had not moved from his position near the reception desk. The two guests who had been watching from the fountain area had not resumed their conversation. The bellman with the luggage cart had found a reason to remain precisely where he was, adjusting and readjusting a handle that did not need adjusting, because leaving felt impossible and staying felt necessary in the way that witnessing always feels necessary when history is being made in a room you happen to occupy. Charlotte had not moved either. She stood with the Birkin bag still on her arm and her copper hair still perfectly arranged, and her white Valentino dress still immaculate. And she looked, for the first time in her adult life, like a woman who had walked into a room without checking what was on the other side of the door. Harrison unfolded the documents inside the envelope. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second, then back to the first because the mind, when it encounters information that restructures everything it believed to be true, requires more than one pass to accept the new architecture. The documents were clean, precise, and entirely legal. They bore the letterhead of K-Dragon Holdings, a financial consultancy registered in Delaware with operational offices in Manhattan, Seoul, and Singapore. They contained, laid out in the clear language of corporate acquisition, the record of a transaction completed 14 months earlier in which K-Dragon Holdings had purchased 23% of the outstanding shares of Voss Grand Hotel LLC through a series of intermediary entities that had been structured with great deliberateness to ensure that the name Kwon Ji-ho appeared nowhere in the transaction record until the moment Kwon Ji-ho chose to make it appear. That moment was now. The 23%, Harrison began, and then stopped, because there was no version of the sentence he could complete that would make the situation better. "Is mine," Kwon said simply. "Has been mine for 14 months. Charlotte took one step forward. Her eyes were on the documents in Harrison's hands, with an expression that had moved fully past uncertainty and arrived at something raw. The specific look of a person watching the map they have navigated their entire life reveal itself to be incorrect. "That's not possible," she said. "My father would never sell shares in this property without telling me. This hotel is our—" "Your father," Kwon said with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who is not yet ready to hear it, but will have no choice, did not know the full structure of the entity he was selling to. The intermediaries were real companies with real operating histories. The transaction was clean. The price was fair. Generous, in fact. Your father made a reasonable decision with the information he had." He paused. "He simply did not have all of it." Charlotte's jaw tightened. Something was happening behind her eyes. A rapid, private calculation, the kind that people perform when they realize the ground beneath an argument has shifted, and they need to find new footing quickly. She was intelligent. Whatever else she was not slow. And she understood in this moment the precise shape of what was being told to her. She turned to Harrison. "Get my father on the phone," she said. "Now." "Ms. Voss," Harrison began. "Now, Harrison." Harrison looked at the documents. He looked at Kwon. He looked at Charlotte. And then, with the expression of a man who has just understood that there is no position in this room that does not cost him something, he excused himself quietly and moved toward the back corridor. The lobby settled into a new configuration of silence. Charlotte turned back to Kwon. She was gathering herself, visibly, effortfully. The way a person gathers themselves when they have been trained since childhood that composure is the armor that class provides, and that losing it in public is the only unforgivable failure. Whatever the financial situation is, she said, and her voice had recovered most of its surface steadiness, it has nothing to do with what happened here this morning. That woman was, "Do not," Quan said. Just those 2 words, quiet as everything else he had said. But something in the room changed when he said them. The way the air in a space changes when a window opens or closes. A shift in pressure, in temperature, in the fundamental quality of the atmosphere. Charlotte stopped. "Do not finish that sentence," Quan said, with an explanation of what she did. "There is no version of what she did that arrives at what you did." Charlotte's chin lifted again. Old instinct, old armor. "I am not going to be lectured. You are going to listen," Quan said. "Because I am going to say this once." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. The men who had worked beside him for years, who had watched him navigate situations that would have fractured most people, often remarked afterward that the most frightening thing about Kwon Ji-ho was not what he did when he was angry. It was the fact that anger, in him, produced not heat, but a kind of absolute crystalline clarity. A narrowing of focus so complete that it seemed to reduce the entire world to the single point he had chosen to address. He had chosen Charlotte Voss. "You walked into this building," he said, "and you saw a woman doing her work. You decided, before she said a single word to you, what she was and what she was worth, and what you were permitted to do to her. And then you did it. In front of witnesses. With your hand." He paused. "You did not do that because she was rude to you. You did it because you believed you could. Because you have always believed you could. Because no one in your life has ever made the cost of that belief real to you." Charlotte opened her mouth. "I am making it real to you, now." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture, that you can feel against your skin, that settles on the room like something physical. And then, from beside the cleaning cart, in a voice that was quiet and even and carried the specific weight of something that had been thought about very carefully before being said, Serena spoke. "I need to say something." Both of them looked at her. She had not moved from her position beside the cart. She stood straight, the way she always stood, the cap still on her head, the uniform still pressed and correct, the cheek still marked. She was not looking at Kwon. She was looking at Charlotte. Directly, openly, with an expression that contained neither hostility nor performance. "I know you didn't know who I was," Serena said. "I know that when you looked at me this morning, you saw the uniform and you stopped there. I'm not surprised by that. I've been in this uniform for 3 months and I've watched people stop there every single day." Charlotte said nothing. "But I need you to hear this," Serena continued, "because I think it matters more than anything else that's happened in this room today. The question is not whether you would have touched me if you'd known I was his fiancée. The question, the only question that actually means something, is whether what you did was wrong because of who I turned out to be, or whether it was wrong before you knew any of that." She let the question sit. "Because if it was only wrong because of him," Serena said, "then you haven't learned anything today except to check the wrists of the women you want to hit." Something moved across Charlotte's face. It was not quite remorse. It was something earlier than remorse. The precondition of it. The moment before a person's understanding shifts when they realize they are being asked a question they do not have a good answer to, and that the absence of a good answer is itself the answer. Charlotte began. You don't have to answer me, Serena said. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm asking you to carry the question. She reached up and unpinned the cap from her hair. The black, natural hair that had been contained beneath it for 3 months emerged into the chandelier light of the Voss Grand Hotel lobby. Full and magnificent and entirely itself, rising around her face with a volume and a presence that seemed to change the geometry of the space she occupied. She placed the cap on the cleaning cart. She smoothed the front of her uniform with both hands, and then she looked at Quan. Not with relief, not with the expression of someone who has been rescued, but with the expression of someone who had handled what needed handling and was now simply ready to go home. I'm done with my shift, she said. Quan looked at her for a long moment. In his expression, beneath the wall that he maintained for the rest of the world, was something that he reserved entirely for her. Something that had no name in the vocabulary of the kind of man he was, but that anyone watching could have identified without difficulty. Then let's go, he said. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked together toward the revolving doors, the woman in the hotel uniform with the gold dragon bracelet catching the light at her wrist, and the man in the black Brioni suit with the tattoos climbing his neck. And the lobby parted for them without instruction, the way spaces part for people who have already decided where they are going. Charlotte Voss stood in the center of the lobby that bore her name and watched them leave. Behind her, Harrison Cole had returned from the back corridor. He stood at a respectful distance, holding his phone, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who has just spoken to Edward Voss and learned several things simultaneously that he wishes he could unknow. Ms. Voss, he said carefully. She did not turn around. Your father, Harrison said, would like to speak with you. The revolving doors completed their turn. Quan and Serena stepped out into the cold Manhattan morning and were gone. Edward Voss was 61 years old and had spent 4 decades constructing a life that he believed was, if not invulnerable, then at least fortified. He had built the fortification methodically, property by property, connection by connection, handshake by handshake in the particular language of old Manhattan money, which was not the language of numbers, but the language of names. Who you knew, who owed you, who you could call at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and have a problem quietly resolved before noon. He called Harrison Cole at 11:14. The conversation lasted 9 minutes. Harrison spoke carefully, the way a man speaks when he is delivering information that he knows will be received badly and has decided that precision is the only mercy he can offer. He described the documents. He described the shareholding structure. He described, with the practiced neutrality of a man who has learned to report facts without editorializing, what had occurred in the lobby of the Voss Grand Hotel that morning between his daughter and the woman who was engaged to the man who owned nearly a quarter of the building. Edward Voss listened without interrupting. When Harrison finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. Get her on the phone, Edward said finally. His voice had the quality of something that had been carefully flattened. Tell her to pick up. He called Charlotte 4 times before she answered. She was still in the lobby when the 4th call came through, still standing in approximately the same position she had occupied when Quan and Serena had walked out through the revolving doors, as though moving felt like an admission of something she was not yet prepared to admit. The Birkin bag was still on her arm. The Chanel sunglasses were still pushed back on her head, but the architecture of her posture had changed in a way that was subtle and total. The way a building changes after a structural element has been compromised. Still standing, still recognizable, but no longer quite the same thing it was before. She looked at her father's name on the screen. She answered on the fourth ring. The conversation that followed was the shortest and most expensive of Charlotte Voss's life, measured not in the currency of money, but in the currency of the thing that the Voss family had always valued above money, above property, above the Italian marble and the Viennese chandeliers and the fresh flowers replaced every morning at 6:45. Reputation. Edward did not shout. He had learned, over 6 decades, that shouting was for people who had not yet discovered that the truly devastating things could be said in a normal voice. He told her, in that normal voice, that the 3 Asian investment groups currently in negotiation with Voss Industries had all requested, within the past 40 minutes, that scheduled meetings be postponed pending internal review. He told her that his personal attorney had already received 2 calls. He told her that the video, and here his voice shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but that Charlotte, who had grown up reading the frequencies of her father's moods the way sailors read weather, heard with complete clarity. The video had been seen by people whose names she would recognize, and whose opinions carried consequences she was not equipped to absorb. "Dad," she began. Charlotte. Just her name, in the tone that meant the conversation had ended before it had started. "Come home." She came home. The video had been posted by 4 separate accounts before noon. None of them had planned it. None of them had coordinated. They were simply 4 people who had been present in the lobby of the Voss Grand Hotel on a Tuesday morning and who had witnessed something that their phones had recorded and their instincts had identified, independently and simultaneously, as a thing the world should see. The footage was imperfect, shot from different angles at different distances, with the slightly shaky quality of video captured by people who were more focused on the event than on the framing. But imperfect footage of a real thing carries a truth that no amount of production value can manufacture. And what the footage showed was real in every dimension that mattered. It showed the sound of the slap. It showed Serena's head turning with the force of it. It showed the 3 seconds of absolute stillness that followed. Serena motionless. The lobby motionless. The entire room suspended in the specific silence of people who have just witnessed something cross a line that they had not known was there until it was crossed. It showed Quan entering through the revolving doors. It showed him walking to Serena with that unhurried, absolute certainty. It showed his thumb, gentle against her cheek. And then one of the 4 videos, shot from the angle closest to the exchange, captured something that the others did not. It captured, faintly but clearly enough, 7 words in Serena's voice before the audio degraded into lobby ambiance. Did it have to be wrong for a reason? It was not the exact sentence she had said. Audio compression and distance and the ambient noise of the hotel lobby had collapsed her full question into a fragment. But the fragment was enough. The fragment landed on the internet with the precision of something that had been sharpened for exactly this purpose. And it moved through the connected world with the speed that true things move when they find an atmosphere ready to receive them. #Voss Hotel trended for 72 hours. The Birkin bag became a symbol that people did not need to explain to each other. The specific shade of champagne became shorthand in online conversations for a kind of obliviousness so complete, it circles back around to something almost structural. The obliviousness of a person so insulated by wealth and assumption that the possibility of consequence has been rendered literally unimaginable. Charlotte's publicist released a statement on the second day. It was 4 sentences long, written in the language that legal teams write when they are trying to minimize exposure while appearing to accept responsibility. And it satisfied no one, because it was not written for the people it needed to satisfy. It was written for shareholders and insurers and the internal audience of the Voss family machinery. And the world, which had seen the video and heard the fragment of Serena's voice, recognized the gap between the statement and the truth of the thing immediately and without mercy. The three investment groups did not reschedule their meetings. Kwon Ji-ho made no public statement. He had never made a public statement in his life and did not intend to begin now. The machinery that he operated moved beneath the surface of things, and it had been moving since the moment he left the lobby of the Voss Grand Hotel with Serena's hand in the crook of his arm. And it would continue moving at its own pace and in its own direction until it arrived at whatever destination he had already identified, quietly, in the elevator ride down to the car that morning. He did not call Edward Voss. He did not need to. The $40 million in structured debt that K-Dragon Holdings held against the Voss Group sat in its documentation the way all leverage sits when it is held by someone who understands patience, not as a weapon being brandished, but as a fact of geography. A mountain does not threaten the valley. It simply exists, and the valley arranges itself accordingly. Edward Voss's attorney called Kwon's attorney on the third day. The conversation was brief and professional, and resolved nothing except the establishment of a channel through which future conversations could occur, which was, for now, precisely what Kwon had intended. On the morning of the fourth day, Serena Hayes walked out of the building she and Kwon shared. Her building, the one she had chosen and furnished and made into the specific version of home that she had always wanted, wearing her own clothes. Dark tailored trousers, a cream silk blouse, a long camel coat that moved well in the November wind. Her hair was free and full around her face. The gold dragon bracelet was visible at her wrist, unhidden, catching the cold morning light. She walked 4 blocks to a coffee shop she liked, ordered the thing she always ordered, sat at the table near the window, and opened her laptop. She had an email from the dean of the International Law Clinic at Columbia, where she had been in conversation about a fellowship position that would begin in the spring. The email confirmed her acceptance and asked when she was available to meet. She typed her response. She closed the laptop. She drank her coffee and looked out the window at the city moving past in its ordinary, indifferent, relentless way. She thought about the lobby, about the sound, about the 3 seconds of stillness afterward, and the question she had carried in her chest for years before she finally said it out loud in the center of that marble room. Did it need to be wrong for a reason? She had not asked it for Charlotte. She had understood, even as she said it, that Charlotte was not yet the person who could receive what that question was actually asking. People arrive at real understanding on their own schedule, in their own privacy, usually long after the moment that required it has passed. You could not accelerate that process from the outside. You could only ask the question and trust that it would find its way in eventually, the way water finds its way through stone. Not by force, but by patience and persistence and the simple fact of being real. She had asked it for the lobby, for Harrison, standing with the documents in his hands, for the bellman who hadn't moved, for the woman near the elevator with her hand pressed to her mouth, for the 4 people with their phones, for every room she had ever walked into wearing something that made the room decide it already knew what she was. She finished her coffee. She put on her coat. She walked back out into the city. Her city, the one she had chosen the same way she had chosen everything in her life. Not because it was given to her, but because she had looked at it clearly and decided it was worth the work. And she did not look back. 3 blocks away, in the apartment that smelled like tea and books, and the particular quiet of 2 people who had learned to share silence without filling it, Kwon Ji-ho sat at the kitchen table with the wedding documents open in front of him and a pen in his hand. April, they had said. He signed his name on the line and set the pen down. Outside, The city moved the way it always moved. And somewhere in a room she had not yet entered, Charlotte Voss sat with a question she had not yet answered, in the long and necessary silence of someone who has finally, at great cost, begun to understand that the ground they have been standing on was never as solid as they had been told. The marble was still Italian. The chandeliers were still Viennese. The flowers would still be replaced tomorrow morning at 6:45. But the lobby of the Voss Grand Hotel would never again be exactly the room it had been on that Tuesday morning, before the revolving doors turned and the sound of a slap rewrote everything that everyone in that room thought they knew about where power lived and what it looked like, and whose wrist it rested on. Quiet and golden, waiting to be seen. Serena didn't need to shout. You don't need to. She knew who she was, even when the world only saw the uniform. And the truth is this: the woman who can't be manipulated isn't the one who has a powerful man by her side. It's the one who already knows her own worth before anyone comes along to confirm it. If you've ever felt small in a space that should be yours, if you've ever explained your pain to someone who benefited from not understanding, if you've ever confused intensity with respect, attention with love, this guide was created for you. The Woman He Can't Manipulate 30-Day Reset is a 30-day guided challenge created especially for Black women over 45 who are ready to stop doubting what they already know. It's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming harder to confuse. The link is in the QR code on the screen now, or in the description, or in the established comment below. You've loaded enough. It's time to return to yourself. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been looked at and judged so quickly that the person never even bothered to see who you actually were underneath what you were wearing, or where you were standing, or what you were doing in that moment? Have you ever had to carry your dignity in silence, knowing your truth was bigger than the room gave you credit for, and choosing to let that truth speak for itself instead of defending it out loud? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, justice, and the kind of karma that arrives quietly but changes everything, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click join to become a part of our community and help the channel.